We end tonight with two ingenious solutions to Florida's ongoing battles with wild reptiles. And for that, we take you to opposite ends of the technology spectrum. Florida is deploying robotic rabbits to help capture invasive Burmese pythons in the Everglades.
For 30 years, Florida threw everything at an invasion that was quietly erasing the Everglades. Drones, dogs, thermal imaging, millions of dollars. Yet the Burmese pythons kept winning.
The Burmese python infestation in Florida is far from a work of fiction.
So scientists asked a dangerous question. What if we stopped hunting the predator? What if we made it hunt us instead? Their answer was radical. Release the perfect prey, not flesh and blood, but solar-powered, fur-covered machines designed to trigger a snake's instincts. What happened next stunned critics, divided conservationists, and may have rewritten the rules of wildlife warfare. This is the story of the Robo-Rabbit program and the risky idea that could change conservation forever.
It's high tech versus high threat in the Florida Everglades.
Oh, researchers have developed robot rabbits.
The invasion nobody saw coming. To understand why Florida did something this extreme, you need to understand what they were fighting against. The Everglades is one of the most unique ecosystems on the planet. A river of grass flowing slowly toward the sea, home to alligators, panthers, manatees, and hundreds of species found nowhere else on Earth. For millions of years, this wilderness balanced itself perfectly. Then humans got involved. In the 1980s and 90s, exotic pets were all the rage. And few things seemed more exotic than a baby Burmese python, gorgeous, patterned, docile enough to rest in a child's hands. Pet stores sold them for a few $100s, and buyers had no idea what they were getting into. These snakes grow fast. Within 3 years, that cute little serpent becomes a 12-foot constrictor that eats rabbits whole and needs a custom-built enclosure. Within 5 years, it might be 18 feet long and strong enough to kill a deer.
A Burmese python wrapped up around a full-size white-tailed deer.
Most owners simply could not handle them, so they did the unthinkable. They released them into canals, into backyards, into the swamps. One by one, these snakes disappeared into the Everglades, and the ecosystem had no idea what hit it. Then came 1992. Hurricane Andrew tore through South Florida with winds over 160 miles per hour, destroying everything in its path, including reptile breeding facilities.
Well, Hurricane Andrew made landfall 33 years ago today, back in 1992. It remains one of the most destructive hurricanes in U.S. history.
Thousands of pythons escaped into the wild in a single night. The invasion had officially begun. The Everglades was paradise for these predators. Warm year-round, endless hiding spots in the sawgrass and mangroves. Prey that had never evolved to fear a giant constrictor. And perhaps most terrifying of all, no natural predators to keep them in check. The pythons did what invasive species do best. They multiplied. A single female can lay up to 100 eggs per year. Do the math.
Female Burmese pythons can lay up to 100 eggs. The mother remains in the nest.
Even if only a fraction survive, the population doubles, then doubles again, then doubles again. By the 2000s, biologists started sounding the alarm. By the 2010s, it was a full-blown crisis. The numbers are staggering. In areas where pythons are dominant, raccoon populations have dropped by 99%. Opossums, gone. Marsh rabbits, virtually extinct. Deer, bobcats, even alligators have been found inside python stomachs. One researcher documented a python that had swallowed an entire adult deer. Another team filmed a python and an alligator locked in a death battle. Both died. The food web that took millions of years to develop was collapsing in a matter of decades. And the ripple effects go far beyond the obvious victims. Without small mammals, birds of prey lose their food supply. Without scavengers, carcasses pile up, altering soil nutrients. Without rabbits and rodents, the understory vegetation grows unchecked, changing the entire landscape. The Everglades, once one of the most biodiverse places in North America, was becoming a python empire, and humans were powerless to stop it. The Great Hunt and why it failed. When officials finally accepted the severity of the invasion, they responded the way humans usually respond to wild problems. They turned it into a competition. In 2013, Florida launched the first ever Python Challenge, an open call to anyone brave enough to step into the swamp. The concept was bold, maybe even desperate. Train ordinary citizens, arm them with basic equipment, set them loose for a month, and pay cash for every snake brought back. The first challenge drew over 1,600 participants from across the country. Hunters arrived with airboats, machetes, thermal scopes, and flashlights strapped to their foreheads. Television crews followed, turning the Everglades into a bizarre blend of reality show and survival contest. For weeks, the swamp echoed with the sound of motors and shouts as people scanned the reeds for the telltale shimmer of scales. The media absolutely loved it, but the numbers told a different story. After weeks of effort by 1,600 people, the combined haul totaled just 68 snakes, 68 out of tens of thousands believed to roam those wetlands. It was a fraction so small that biologists barely noticed any impact on the population. The Python Challenge was exciting television, but as a control strategy, it was a spectacular failure. Florida doubled down anyway. The challenge became an annual event with bigger prizes, more training, and better promotion. Hunters learned from their mistakes. Some started using thermal imaging and night vision equipment. The best of them managed to capture dozens of snakes in a single season. One champion brought in a python over 17 feet long. The winners were celebrated as heroes.
A snake more than 17 feet long, weighing a whopping 132 pounds. A python hunter in Florida.
But the math never changed. For every python removed, 2 more were hatching somewhere in the reeds. In 2017, officials abandoned the competition model entirely. The South Florida Water Management District launched the Python Elimination Program, a professional operation with trained, licensed hunters paid by the hour. These were not amateurs looking for glory. They were professionals patrolling the canals at night, sliding their boats through black water, scanning for movement under the moonlight. Dangerous, exhausting, solitary work. And for a while, it seemed to be working. The kill counts climbed year after year, but the python population did not decline, not even a little. Researchers estimated the snakes were reproducing faster than hunters could remove them. The financial burden was crushing, millions of dollars to patrol 1.5 million acres of swamp, and the returns kept diminishing. They tried everything: Judas snakes, pythons fitted with radio trackers that would lead hunters to breeding aggregations, drones, dogs. Nothing made a dent. The problem was simple but unsolvable. The Everglades was too vast, too complex, and the pythons were too perfectly adapted to remain hidden. Every hunt, every capture, every bounty paid was like fighting a wildfire with a pair of scissors. You could see the individual flames dying, but the fire kept spreading. By the end of the 2010s, officials faced a brutal truth. Brute force would never win this war. They needed something smarter. The secret weapon. Nobody expected. When hunting failed, wildlife managers turned to a new kind of ally, one that did not rely on sight, luck, or endurance, one that could detect what humans never could. They turned to dogs. In 2020, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission launched a small but daring experiment. 2 dogs, trained like detectives, would be sent into the swamps to find pythons using the one thing humans could not replicate: an extraordinary sense of smell. Their names were Truman and Eleanor. Truman, a black Labrador with the easygoing face of a family pet, but the focus of a soldier. Eleanor, a Dutch shepherd with alert amber eyes, bred for precision and courage. For months, trainers worked with them on a single task: recognize the faint, musky odor that Burmese pythons leave behind. It is a scent humans cannot detect, but it lingers in grass and mud long after a snake has passed. The dogs learn to find pythons hidden in crates, in tall weeds, even underwater in submerged logs. The results came fast. In their first month in the field, Truman and Eleanor helped capture several large pythons that had eluded human crews for weeks. The process was almost magical to watch. The dog would work on a long lead, nose low to the ground, while the handler followed with GPS tracker in hand. Suddenly, Truman's tail would stiffen. Eleanor would circle and freeze, the universal sign that prey was near. Moments later, a flashlight beam would catch the slow ripple of scales in the grass. Snakes that biologists had searched for over hours, the dogs found in minutes. More importantly, the dogs revealed something scientists had not anticipated: patterns. Every time they tracked a python, the scent trail led somewhere significant: a nest, an egg cluster, or other snakes hiding nearby. The dogs were not just catching individual pythons, they were mapping the entire invasion. Researchers began charting these discoveries, identifying breeding hotspots they had never known existed. For the first time, humans had a tool that could actually understand the enemy. But success in the Everglades always comes at a price. The swamp is brutal on dogs. Sharp sawgrass slices their paws. Alligators and cottonmouths lurk in every waterway. The heat and humidity are crushing. Handlers had to outfit their dogs with cooling vests, protective boots, and constant hydration. And then there was the predator itself, a 20-foot constrictor that could easily kill a dog if given the chance. The real limitation, though, was scale. 2 dogs, no matter how talented, could not cover 1.5 million acres. To expand the program would mean training hundreds of teams, spending tens of millions of dollars, and providing constant logistical support. The technique worked beautifully on a small scale, but it was a tool, not a solution. Still, Truman and Eleanor had proven something crucial. The right kind of intelligence could outsmart the pythons. The question was how to scale that intelligence without scaling the cost. The answer would come from an unlikely place, and it would push scientists into morally uncomfortable territory. The live bait controversy. Desperation breeds innovation, and sometimes controversy. After years of failed hunts and limited success with Detector dogs, Florida's scientists found themselves staring at a difficult truth. To defeat the pythons, they needed to understand what the snakes wanted most. The answer was simple and unsettling. They wanted rabbits, specifically marsh rabbits, once among the most common mammals in the Everglades, and now nearly wiped out by the very predators researchers were trying to stop. The question that followed was as risky as it was bold. Could live rabbits lure pythons out of hiding? At first, the idea sparked outrage. Using live animals as bait felt cruel, even barbaric. But for some biologists, it was an unavoidable next step. Pythons are ambush predators. They are drawn by scent and heat, not movement alone. If you could concentrate that scent and heat in a specific location, you could theoretically draw pythons to you instead of searching millions of acres to find them. It was a complete inversion of the hunting strategy, and it might actually work. In small, controlled studies, researchers built secure pens along swampy trails and placed live rabbits inside. The enclosures were designed to protect the animals from direct attack while still allowing their scent and body heat to spread through the environment. Then they waited. What happened next stunned everyone. Within weeks, pythons began appearing, one after another. At a single study site, more than 20 snakes slithered toward the enclosures over the course of a few months. The rabbits, terrified but physically unharmed behind wire barriers, had become magnets for one of the most elusive predators on Earth. The findings were undeniable. Prey attraction worked where brute force hunting had failed, but success came at a moral cost. Images of trembling live rabbits surrounded by constrictors provoked outrage from animal welfare groups and even from some scientists within the project. Critics labeled the experiments barbaric. They argued that no species, no matter how invasive, could justify the psychological trauma inflicted on innocent animals. Public pressure mounted. Media coverage turned negative, and soon enough, funding for live bait trials was completely withdrawn. The program was dead. But something important survived: a principle. The method worked. It was the means that had failed the moral test. The next question was obvious. Could scientists replicate the scent, heat, and subtle movement of a marsh rabbit without using a living creature? Could they build something that fooled a python's senses completely? The answer would require a collaboration unlike anything wildlife management had ever attempted.
Florida is filled to the brim with snakes, specifically Burmese pythons. As we reported yesterday, the predators have been wiping out other wildlife.
Building the perfect fake engineers, biologists, and conservation tech specialists began working together, merging wildlife science with robotics in ways never before attempted. Their goal was audacious: create a mechanical decoy so convincing that a python, an animal that hunts by sensing infrared heat and tracking chemical scent trails, would not be able to tell the difference between it and real prey. Every sensory trigger that lures a python had to be replicated: the warmth of a living body, the thermal contrast against cool swamp air, the faint musky smell of mammal fur, the occasional twitch of movement that signals something alive. The team started with heat. Burmese pythons have specialized pit organs on their faces that detect infrared radiation. They can sense temperature differences as small as a fraction of a degree. To fool this system, engineers developed thermal pads that emit a heat signature nearly identical to a living marsh rabbit. The warmth had to be consistent, not too hot, not too cold, and it had to persist for weeks in the harsh swamp environment. Next came the scent. Pythons track prey using their forked tongues, which pick up chemical particles from the air and deliver them to a specialized organ in their mouths.
They allow the snake to sweep a wider area and pick up odor molecules from two different spots at the same time. When it retracts, the forked tongue fits perfectly into this tongue-shaped groove in the roof of the mouth.
The smell of a rabbit is complex. Skin oils, urine markers, pheromones, the bacterial signature of living fur. Chemists worked for months to develop a synthetic compound that mimicked this olfactory profile. The scent emitters had to release just enough smell to drift on the swamp breeze without fading too quickly or becoming overwhelming. Then movement. Real rabbits twitch. Their ears rotate. Their noses quiver. To a python watching from the reeds, this subtle motion signals the difference between food and debris. Engineers installed silent micromotors that could make the decoy's ears twitch at random intervals. The movement was slight, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to trigger a python's predatory instincts. The body itself was constructed from weather-resistant polymers, coated with synthetic fur designed to feel like a real animal. Hidden inside was a sophisticated payload, a motion-triggered camera linked to a cellular transmitter. Whenever something approached the decoy, the system activated and sent an alert to biologists stationed miles away. Everything was powered by small solar panels connected to rechargeable batteries.
Robotic rabbits to help capture invasive Burmese pythons in the Everglades. These decoy bunnies are solar-powered, remote-controlled, and complete,
allowing the units to operate for weeks without maintenance. The decoys were anchored inside protective enclosures, strong enough to survive curious raccoons, tropical storms, and the occasional alligator. After 18 months of development, the Robo-Rabbits were ready. They looked almost comical, small fur-covered machines surrounded by wires and sensors, but they represented something profound. Years of frustration, millions in funding. A last-ditch effort to save one of America's most endangered ecosystems. The question was whether the snakes would buy it, and there was only one way to find out. Into the wild, When Florida's first batch of robo-rabbits rolled into the Everglades at sunrise, few believed the experiment would work. The prototypes sat motionless in the morning mist. Glinting solar panels, synthetic fur slightly damp from humidity, those uncanny twitching ears. Wildlife officers called them a last hope. Engineers called them a technological miracle. Critics called them expensive toys destined to fail. The swamp would be the judge. 120 units were deployed across key hotspots identified through years of python tracking data, breeding aggregation sites, canal crossings, areas where previous hunts had encountered high concentrations of snakes. Each decoy was positioned inside a protective pen, GPS tagged, and linked to a central monitoring system. Then the teams pulled back and waited. The Everglades had crushed optimism before. Hunters had searched for months without finding a single snake. The detector dogs had worked brilliantly but could not scale.
The Southern Glades Wildlife and Environment Area, FWC says these detector dogs have been carefully trained to search for pythons.
Every previous strategy had shown early promise before reality set in. No one expected immediate results, which is why what happened next stunned everyone. Within 72 hours, the first alerts started coming in. A motion sensor had triggered at Station 14. Researchers pulled up the camera feed and watched, barely breathing, as a massive Burmese python slithered into view. The snake approached the decoy slowly, tongue flicking, body glistening under the infrared light. It circled the enclosure once, twice, then struck, wrapping its coils around the motionless fake rabbit as if it were living prey. The footage was extraordinary. No human had ever witnessed python hunting behavior this close, this clearly, without disturbing the animal. Over the following weeks, the data poured in. Python after python approached the decoys. Some struck immediately, others were more cautious, sensing something strange but unable to resist the combination of heat, scent, and movement. A few circled and retreated, apparently not fooled. But the success rate was remarkable, far higher than anyone had projected. More importantly, the robo-rabbits were doing something no hunting strategy had ever accomplished. They were generating intelligence. Every camera activation added data points to an ever-growing digital map of python activity. Researchers could now pinpoint where breeding females gathered, which canals guided snake movement, what times of day the predators were most active. The decoys had become both bait and reconnaissance network, a passive surveillance system that worked around the clock, in conditions too harsh for human patrols. The psychological shift was priceless. For the first time in decades, researchers felt like they were on offense. The Everglades was still vast, still complex, still crawling with tens of thousands of pythons. But now humans had something they had never had before: actionable intelligence. The question was no longer whether the strategy worked. The question was whether it could scale. The cost of innovation. Success in the Everglades has never come cheap, and the Robo-Rabbit program is no exception.
Florida has come up with an adorable solution to a serious problem. These robot bunnies are being deployed in the Everglades to help control the exploding population.
Each unit costs approximately $4,000 to manufacture, not including deployment, maintenance, and monitoring. For a statewide network of thousands of decoys, the price tag climbs into the tens of millions. And the harsh swamp environment takes a brutal toll on equipment. Humidity corrodes electronics. Flooding damages solar panels. Wildlife, ironically including the pythons themselves, can destroy units designed to attract them. The sustainability of the program depends on funding that is far from guaranteed. Florida's wildlife budget is stretched thin across dozens of priorities. Federal support fluctuates with political winds. And unlike charismatic species like panthers or manatees, pythons do not inspire the kind of emotional connection that drives donations. They are the villains of this story. And villains rarely get rescue campaigns. There are also technical limitations that no amount of money can solve, at least not yet. The robo-rabbits are effective at concentrating python activity, but they cannot actually capture snakes. Every positive identification still requires a human response team to physically remove the animal. In remote areas of the Everglades, that response time can be hours or even days. By then, the python has long since vanished back into the reeds. Some researchers are already working on next-generation solutions. Automated trapping systems that close when a python enters. Drones that can respond to alerts and spray immobilizing agents. Even genetic modifications that could reduce python fertility over generations. These ideas are years away from deployment, if they work at all, but they represent the continued evolution of a strategy born from desperation. And then there are the critics. Some ecologists worry that the robo-rabbit approach treats symptoms rather than causes. The pythons are here because of the exotic pet trade and inadequate regulation. Removing snakes one by one, however cleverly, does not address the policy failures that created the crisis. Others raise ethical concerns about deploying artificial intelligence in natural ecosystems. What precedent does this set? Are we comfortable with a future where wild spaces are monitored by surveillance networks designed to manipulate animal behavior? These are not easy questions. They do not have easy answers. But one thing is undeniable. The alternative, doing nothing, means watching one of America's great natural treasures disappear. And that is a cost no one can afford. The robo-rabbits won't save the Everglades overnight, and they may never eliminate the pythons at all. But for the first time in decades, this fight feels guided by strategy instead of desperation. In a landscape already pushed to the brink, scientists are no longer chasing predators through the swamp. They're shaping behavior, gathering intelligence, and letting the data speak. Somewhere in the sawgrass, a machine waits. Somewhere nearby, a python moves. And with every silent encounter, the future of conservation shifts just a little. The question now isn't whether this experiment works, but what it unleashes next. Are we witnessing the beginning of a new era in how humans manage nature, or the first step into a future we don't yet understand?